In the first 22 years of the American manned space program, there have been 37 missions, and 50 astronauts have left the Earth behind. The space program has created heroes, names that fill our history books. Alan Shepard, the first American man to go into space. John Glenn, the first American man to go into orbit. Scott Carpenter, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton, the men of Mercury 7. Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Astronauts were men, until 1983, that is.
We go for main engine start. We have main engine start, and the ignition, and liftoff. Liftoff of STS-7 and America's first woman astronaut. And the shuttle has pulled the tower.
June 18, 1983, Dr. Sally Ride made history. It took her 6 years to prepare for her mission, but it took NASA 22 years to make it possible.
Show it actually going out of the bay.
Okay. Discovery Houston with you through Hawaii, and we've got a good picture of you all in the crew module.
Judy Resnick was next in August 1984.
Okay, we copy. Go for command pass to RF and PI setup.
And soon after, there was Kathryn Sullivan, October 1984. This is the story of the first 3 American women astronauts and the historic roles they've played in the U.S. space program.
You can't describe what the Earth looks like, and it's, you know, I've been trying, and I found that I just can't do it. And a lot of the pictures that we took, although they're spectacular, we look at them and we're always disappointed because it just doesn't capture what the Earth really looks like.
Sally Ride has had an experience very few people now living will ever share. She has orbited the Earth 231 times as a crew member of the Space Shuttle Challenger. But she was more than just another astronaut. She was the first American woman to fly in outer space, and the whole world was watching. Would being female make any difference?
The women and the men do exactly the same jobs on orbit, and weightlessness is a great equalizer. You don't need to be strong to do things up there, and there is really no difference.
But the fact that she was both a woman and an astronaut made headline news, and Sally Ride became a household word.
Dr. Ride, the obvious question, how does it feel to realize that because primarily of the luck of your birth, along with some good work and so on, you are going to become a footnote in history and a trivia question subject forever, among other things? How do you relate to all of that?
Gosh, that's quite an honor. Well, of course, I was very honored that NASA chose me to be the first woman. I guess that I was maybe more excited about getting a chance to fly early than I was about getting to be the first woman. I think that it's a real experience and the experience of a lifetime to be able to fly in space and fly aboard the space shuttle. And I have to admit that I'm more excited about that opportunity than I am about being the, as you say, a footnote in history.
The questions continued 3 weeks before liftoff, a routine pre-flight press conference.
Now, Dr. Wright, during your training exercises as a member of this group, when there was a problem, when there was a glitch or whatever, how did you respond? How do you take it as a human being? Do you weep? What do you do?
Why doesn't anybody ask Rick those questions? I don't think I felt angry or disgusted. It made me all the more determined to do things right and to look professional while I was up there.
The crew of STS-7 was responsible for what is now nearly a routine operation, the deployment of satellites. At $11 million a shot, it is more than just good business for NASA. It provides opportunities to develop and to demonstrate new technical capabilities.
Okay, we see fan A on, and we'd like you to take Bravo off
A
now.
Canadian-built remote arm was used for the first time on this flight to pick up, retrieve, and restow a satellite, proving NASA's claim that satellites could be plucked from their orbit safely. Dr. Sally Ride is one of NASA's expert arm operators.
There's a lot involved in the training to operate the arm. I started working with it right after I came to NASA, the first year that I was here, and worked a lot with the engineers up in Toronto, where the arm is made, in the engineering development. Spent a lot of time in their simulators. Once I got assigned to a flight, that's when I really started spending the time at mock-ups like this, where we've got a real live arm. You know, it's a piece of machinery that you can move around and fly around, and you know, you can bump it into things, you can break things with it, and this is the only simulator that you can do that. The arm itself is not strong enough to support itself under gravity, so you can't use the real arm on the ground. You can only use it in orbit.
On their flight, Sally and co-mission specialist John Fabian ran an experiment with the arm called proximity operations. They took a satellite called SPAS-01 out of the cargo bay and released it into orbit to fly on its own. Then, after circling the globe once, the shuttle was maneuvered close to the satellite, and the astronauts used the arm to retrieve it. After 9 hours at this, everyone agreed the test was a big success. Inside the shuttle, zero gravity creates a unique work environment.
Seeing some of the lava flows over Kilauea, but our attitude may prevent that.
We copy.
Weightlessness is fun. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's a completely different experience. You can't simulate it on the ground. It's very benign environment. It's very easy to move around. And I know that personally, while I was up there, I felt like that's where I belonged. You know, that it was much easier for the human body to function in weightlessness than it is with gravity. When it came time to deorbit and come back, we were ready to come back. We didn't necessarily want to come back, but you psychologically prepare yourself to be up there for 7 or 8 days, and when 7 or 8 days are up, you know, you start looking forward to re-entry, because that's another new experience. The orbiter comes in and ionizes the atmosphere as it comes in contact with it. That's what causes the communications blackout, but it also causes just a brilliant orange glow that surrounds the orbiter. You look out the windows and all you see is bright orange that kind of fades into pinks and reds, and it's spectacular, and I was glad somebody told me about it before I saw it for the first time. Once you get down a little bit lower and you start feeling the effects of gravity, even though you're not feeling very much, you're maybe feeling half a G or half what we are feeling right now, it feels very, very smooth. There are a couple spaces, especially right around Mach 1, just as you're going subsonic, where you get kind of a burbling. You get a lot of shaking, but not very much more than that.
I'll say once more, we're away to come to California.
Roger that.
And Challenger's back home, back to Earth. The unofficial touchdown time, in mission elapsed time, 6 days.
With the unqualified success of this mission and the outstanding performance of all its crew members, including Sally Ride, the question arises, why did NASA take so long to include women in the astronaut program?
It hasn't really taken NASA 20 years to let women in the program. We've had women working in the space program for a considerable period of time. And again, if you look at the criteria, when you look at just the astronauts, the criteria for selecting astronauts in the 60s and what was required, there were not a lot of women who met those requirements.
To understand the requirements, we have to look at the early days of the space program, the days when spaceflight meant sending humans into a dark unknown. In the early 60s, the United States was in a space race with the Soviet Union. The pressure was on to send a man into orbit. President Eisenhower decided the new astronauts should be military test pilots, men who had already distinguished themselves under extreme pressure and whose flight experience was most similar to this new environment. After a lengthy and rigorous selection process, 35 military test pilots made it into the final round. Not knowing what these men would have to endure, NASA wanted to make sure the very best were chosen. So the finalists were sent to the Lovelace Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Its director, Dr. Randy Lovelace, was instructed by NASA to examine in detail the physiological and psychological makeup of these candidates. Beyond the standard clinical exams, he was looking for adaptiveness, endurance, and stamina. The men were subjected to a wide range of tests. Lovelace measured body fat as one indicator of potential performance. He assessed reaction time by measuring the muscle's response to electrical stimuli, and he tested endurance by having the men ride a stationary bike until exhausted. After 5 days of rigorous testing, Lovelace turned the results over to NASA. An old friend of Dr. Lovelace, a pilot by the name of Jackie Cochran, encouraged him to now test women, and she offered to pay for the tests. She knew a young pilot by the name of Jerry Cobb. Lovelace agreed and invited Jerry to the clinic. She underwent the same tests as the men and excelled at each. Lovelace was so impressed, he invited 18 more female aviators in for examination. Again, they did well, and some even outperformed their male counterparts. Dr. Lovelace informed NASA of the results and suggested they include women in the space program. NASA rejected the idea. In 1959, the Mercury 7 were chosen: Shepard, Glenn, Shira, Grissom, Cooper, Carpenter, and Slayton. And with Alan Shepard, the race was on. May 5th, 1961.
Fuel is go, 1.2G, cabin at 14 psi, oxygen is go.
But Jerry Cobb was not content with NASA's decision. In 1962, she and others pressed for and won a congressional hearing on the subject of astronaut qualifications. Jerry Cobb observed that the requirement for astronauts to be military test pilots effectively eliminated all women. Since women were not allowed in combat, they were not permitted to train as military test pilots. NASA's position seemed to hold up until the Soviet Union sent the first woman into space. She was Valentina Tereshkova, a 26-year-old parachutist who had no training prior to her selection as a cosmonaut. Despite the Soviet achievement, Congress stood by its conclusion that bringing women into the space program would have to wait. Right now, the training of women would take valuable resources away from America's national goal, putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy.
The Apollo program was a resounding success. But by the end of the 60s, the cost of space exploration had risen astronomically, threatening its very existence. In 1972, President Nixon charged NASA with finding a way to turn space into an economically viable enterprise. NASA responded to the challenge. In the 9 years between 1972 and 1981, the greatest flying machine ever was designed and constructed. The Space Shuttle is the most complex machine ever to fly. It travels 30 times faster than the top speed of a commercial jetliner. It takes off like a rocket, orbits the Earth like a spacecraft, and lands like an airplane. But most important, it is reusable. Each vehicle is capable of at least 100 missions and can usually be readied for its next flight in 60 days. The Shuttle has revolutionized space travel. This is the Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas, headquarters for shuttle training. One person who has played an active role in NASA's changing direction is Associate Director Dr. Carolyn Huntoon.
Shuttle is a vehicle that is a transportation system. It will be used each time it's used for some slightly different mission, carrying a slightly different payload. And what we wanted was a scientist, engineer type that would specialize in the mission part of the shuttle and what it was carrying that time, the payload element, or the work it was to do while it was on orbit. And when those qualifications were laid out, we realized we did not need the high-performance aircraft pilot type, test pilot skills. What we were looking for were people skilled in the engineering and sciences. So this also gave us the original list of qualifications that we went out with in 1976 or 77 for the first call for the shuttle astronauts. And we made it clear at that time that NASA was encouraging both men and women to apply.
With ads like this, NASA began an extensive recruitment effort. Advertisements were placed in both general interest publications and technical journals.
I had honestly not thought about being an astronaut. I had not thought that it was really a career possibility until I saw NASA's announcement back in 1977, I think, that they were accepting applications for astronauts. They hadn't selected any since the middle to late 60s. And I had never thought that it was something that I could apply for. And it was the moment that I saw the advertisement that I knew that's what I wanted to do.
My brother, who's a corporate jet pilot, had heard about this and was very keen on it and began to try to persuade me. And his selling points were that NASA wanted scientists, and they were hoping women and minorities would apply and be accepted on equal basis. And how many 26-year-old PhDs could there be? You ought to try. And I tried to explain to him that, at least from what little he had told me about the job, what NASA wanted and what I was doing under the oceans were probably fairly far apart. And nice try, but you got to be kidding.
NASA went to a great deal of trouble to recruit women and minorities, to let them know they could apply. And once we closed the applications, then all the applications were treated the same.
The 1972 amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a major impetus for NASA's recruitment drive. The act states, federal employment must be made free from any discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And NASA, as a federal agency, was required to comply. NASA's recruitment efforts were well rewarded. More than 8,000 people applied. 1,500 were women. Out of those applications, 35 new candidates were chosen and invited to begin their 5-year commitment at the Johnson Space Center in July 1978. This was the largest candidate training group ever selected and the first to include women and minorities. They came from all over the country and from backgrounds ranging from civil engineering to nuclear physics. The majority were in their mid-20s, and all were in outstanding physical health. From this group, 15 were to train as pilots and 20 as mission specialists. The 6 women were to become mission specialists. They were Dr. Sally Ride, physicist, Dr. Judith Resnick, electrical engineer, Dr. Kathryn Sullivan, geologist, Dr. Anna Fisher, specialist in emergency medicine, Dr. Rhea Seddon, surgeon, and Dr. Shannon Lucid, biochemist. Although each candidate excelled in science or engineering, they were chosen not only for their technical knowledge, but also for their ability to learn quickly and to apply their knowledge to new problems.
You had to recognize that you were not going to be able to continue in research on the basis you were familiar with, i.e. being a frontline, granted, funded scientist. Maybe a collaborator, maybe intimately involved in some of the projects on certain flights, but not as a primarily a marine geophysicist. And that wasn't a problem for me. I was happy with that decision.
One of the appealing things to me about being a mission specialist was that you could do what I had done, which is diversify, go into one field, spread out, get into a lot of the state-of-the-art technologies, make a contribution of sorts, then move on to something new. That was something I had been trying to find in my career and had been doing it piecemeal, and here NASA had it in one package as a mission specialist.
The training necessary to transform these scientists into a disciplined corps of shuttle specialists takes at least 2 years. The first year, they work as a group to master the basics.
I think that once NASA made the decision that they were going to bring women astronauts into the program, they made that decision and stuck by it. And NASA was well prepared for us when we came, I think, for the most part. They treated us the same as they did the men. Our training has been no different, either in the physical side of it or in the actual assignments that were given, the tasks that were assigned, the flight assignments. I really don't think there's been any distinction between the women astronauts and the men astronauts.
One important part of early training is learning how to maneuver comfortably in NASA's high-performance training jets, the T-38s.
The T-38 flying is a very important part of our training, and I didn't appreciate how important it would be until I came to NASA. One of the first things that we learn is how to coordinate as a flight crew, and you learn that in the T-38. You learn to appreciate what the pilot's doing. The pilot learns to trust you in navigation and communication. You learn how to use the radios. You learn how to use all of the navigational equipment, some of which is similar to what we use in the space shuttle. And I think that it really provides an environment that is closer to a space shuttle type environment, that is a flight crew environment that nothing else around here provides.
Sally Ride, like all mission specialists, flies as the flight engineer in the second seat. The T-38 pilots are in training to fly the shuttle. They come to NASA with military test pilot experience, still a prerequisite for selection as a shuttle pilot. To date, no women have satisfied that requirement. To the astronauts, T-38 flying is fun, but it also requires learning survival techniques, what to do in case of an emergency at 35,000 feet, how to survive a crash landing, either on land or at sea. Here in Florida, the new recruits practice parachuting and water survival.
Of our basic training was a lot different than most people imagine. The press only filmed the aspects of the training that looked exciting when we were doing water survival or parachute training, that kind of thing. But really, that only took up maybe 4 or 5 days of that year. Most of the year was spent in the classroom learning about the space shuttle systems, the space shuttle experiments, a little bit of background on the shuttle, and it was just like going back to school.
The ratio of the velocity, relative velocity of the source and receiver is to the velocity of light c. And now
the curriculum is designed to take individuals of diverse skills and give them a unified knowledge base. All candidates, both mission specialists and pilots, are required to take courses in space physiology and medicine, space physics, materials science, astronomy, and Earth observation.
Divided by the wavelength.
This is the Johnson Space Center, where we are located. It's probably the best-looking government facility in the United States.
They are also introduced to each of NASA's 12 facilities, familiarizing themselves with NASA's procedures and protocols.
We built it for about $40 a square foot, and you can't build a house in Texas for that right now.
What I would like to do is just to briefly run around the room and make sure that what Bill described to you as the various functions for the various control room operators, you understand where they would be actually located in this room.
In mission control, the astronauts learn to perform the job of capsule communicator, or CAPCOM. During missions, this person is the vital link between ground operations and the shuttle crew. With this responsibility comes the opportunity to see firsthand how spacecraft systems operate during flight. At the end of the first year, the candidates are promoted to astronaut. They are then eligible for specific flight crew assignments. Once assigned, the crews train together, and each crew member starts developing his or her own specialty.
Here we're standing in Building 9A of the Johnson Space Center, and this building houses the simulator facilities that we use that have the real-sized hardware in it. One of the facilities we have is what we call a manipulator development facility, and that is for the remote manipulator system. We have actually a physical arm that you can use to pick up mock-ups, cardboard mock-ups of the payloads that we would be deploying in space with exactly the same fittings, using exactly the same cameras that we use on board. And I worked in that area for a couple of years. I also did some training on it for our mission, so I've had quite a number of hours in all the different facilities that provide bits and pieces of training for the RMS.
Another part of training is getting accustomed to the interior space of the orbiter. This is done inside a full-size replica, also located in Building 9A.
This is a very accurate mock-up of the orbiter's middeck, the living and stowage area. And you can see it's not very big. It's about 4.5 feet wide, and it's maybe 6 feet tall, and front to back is maybe about 10 or 12 feet. And a lot of it's taken up with storage area, and the airlock takes up a big portion of it. On our flight, for example, this is where 7 people ate their dinners and slept and so forth. Sleeping restraints are on the wall. That's just where we store them. We don't really use them there necessarily. You could hook one off on the ceiling and just let the rest of it float free, or you could just stop in the middle here and let go and relax, and you'd fall asleep right there and just slowly drift around the cabin. This big thing on my left is the airlock, the crew module hatch or low pressure hatch for the airlock, and this hatchway goes in here to the area that we stow the hard portions of the spacesuits in, and where all the control panels for the electrical power and the water and oxygen servicing are plumbed in, so that we can refill the spacesuit tanks and go out again if we need to.
Being an astronaut is not a 40-hour work week. Every day is different, especially when you're training for a crew. You're apt to spend 12 to 16 hours in the simulator one day, spend the next day flying to might be Florida for a test. It might be Colorado to visit an experimenter and see the experiment that you're actually going to be flying. You might spend the next day over here operating the arm. Every day is different, and every day is long.
I think the way that we train by repeating and rehearsing all the different parts of each mission with a lot of malfunction emphasis and how to recover and how to cope with problems, I think that's the way that historically we've trained in the space program, and I think we have proven that it's done us well. We had practiced in our simulators many launches with and without problems. And we had also practiced down in Florida in the vehicle, being strapped in all of our gear in the proper attitude and so forth. And there's a lot of activity and a lot of monitoring of systems that goes on before a launch. I think all of us were in there doing the job that we had trained and practiced so many times for. When the solid rockets ignite, there's no question that you're going somewhere. It's a kick in the pants, and essentially it's like a bumpy train ride, and you feel like you're going pretty fast, but we knew we were going someplace.
3, 2, 1. We have SRB ignition, and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Flight 41D took off on August 29, 1984, only 16 months after Sally Ride's historic liftoff. It was the 12th shuttle flight and the second to include a woman.
Aerodynamic pressure.
Discovery Houston with you through Hawaii, and we've got a good picture of you all in the crew module.
Judy Resnick was one of the mission specialists on this 6-person crew. A full roster of activities was planned for their 6-day mission. On the first day, they deployed 2 satellites and started documenting their work. Another important job was to test a new piece of equipment for NASA, a solar array panel.
This is the largest structure ever deployed in space. It was 1,300 square feet, yet it only weighs 300 pounds. The purpose of the array is to supply electrical power to a spacecraft or a space station by using the sun's energy. A wing this size has about the same capability as one of the orbiter's fuel cells, which is just about as much power as we typically use on orbit.
The solar array, when fully extended, reaches 300 feet. This artist's rendering of a future space station shows how the solar array panels would look if installed as the station's primary energy source.
This video was taken earlier.
Everything went smoothly until the fourth day. Then the crew noticed something unusual. They saw an unexpected accumulation of water at one of the wastewater vents.
The large, odd-shaped ice structure is coming out of the water supply tank valve. Beneath that, the dark opening is the wastewater tank valve. And forward
Using the camera at the end of the remote arm, the astronauts and mission control could watch the water freeze as it poured from the valve.
The problem we had on board was that the tanks that accumulate the water, when they get full, we dump them overboard. And there was a problem with the dump process where instead of just dumping overboard in little ice particles, it became a big icicle and prevented us from doing any further dumps. What we ended up doing was using the robot arm to look at that situation at first. That was when we saw the icicle. The first thing that we did was we turned the orbiter so that that side was facing towards the sun, and we left it there for a couple of days to make the icicle shrink, which it did. Since it did not totally go away, it seemed to be the prudent thing to do to bump it off so that during re-entry it wouldn't accidentally come up and hit some structure that we didn't want it to.
Discovery, Houston.
Hi there.
Hi, JR. Before Henry starts the RMS procedure coming up at sunrise, there are probably a couple things that I ought to tell you, particularly about clearances and camera views.
Okay, we're listening.
The coordination between on board and on the ground was such that the ground went into the simulators and developed some procedures for using the arm to gently nudge the ice right along the edge perpendicular to it. They did it in the simulator. It took some time to develop the procedures because, once again, the arm is wrapped sort of underneath where you can't see the whole end of it. And also the camera sits on the top so that as you're going in to bump the ice off, you lose sight of it because the camera's up above it. So we essentially had to do the procedure in the blind by numbers. Sally Ride and others in our office did a lot of the simulator work on the ground, and Hank Hartsfield on our mission actually did the operation of the robot arm to do this task, and I was sort of the intermediary between the two of them to discuss the whole situation and to integrate what was going to be done next, and to help Hank and to talk to Sally whenever we needed to discuss anything.
Houston, Discovery for Sally.
Go ahead.
The minus 625 constrained in X, is that the clearance between the lower boom and the door? What I mean to say is that to keep a sufficient clearance between those two?
That's correct.
With Sally's instructions, Hartsfield guided the arm along the side of the vehicle and carefully nudged off the ice.
We concur with that.
Well, as is obvious from the picture, the procedure was successful.
Roger that, just like in the SMS.
One of the things about your body in zero gravity is that you don't use your legs for anything. And we have found over the years that it is very important in getting readapted back to gravity to have exercised your muscles, because with no exercise at all, not only do you have no exercise, you don't even have the benefit of standing on them, walking on them, and people have readapted much better with the exercise capability of a treadmill or something similar to that.
Okay, JR, I'll take that compliment.
And our sleep arrangements looked a lot like summer camp. A little bit of bunks here and there. Two of us slept anchored to lockers. Two of us slept strung across the room, and two of us slept on the wall. And you can notice that in 0G, when you relax, your arms tend to float up.
At the end of the 96th orbit, while over the eastern coast of Africa, the shuttle began its descent for landing at Edwards Air Force Base 90 minutes later.
Gears down.
think the most memorable thing about Mission 41D for me was the crew. We trained together for 19 months. We knew each other well. We had confidence in each other's abilities. We had a lot of things to do on our mission, so nobody could know everything. So we had to trust the other person to do his or her job. And the camaraderie that we had during the period of time that we trained together and worked very hard learning the systems and payloads and experiments that we were responsible for made us a very close crew. And when we got on orbit, it was just like we had practiced in the simulators. We enjoyed working with each other. We had a good time, yet we could get all of our work done very efficiently. And I think that's the thing I'll remember most about our mission.
The crew making an inspection of their ship after 2.17 million miles of time and space.
Ammonia A off now, Houston.
Back at the Johnson Space Center, Kathryn Sullivan was finishing the preparations for her mission, scheduled 1 month later. She was to be the first American woman to walk in space.
EVA is a NASA acronym that stands for the big word extravehicular activity, which in turn stands for a spacewalk, basically. And in the Shuttle program, we have a new spacesuit that was specifically designed for the sorts of work we envision ourselves doing from Shuttle. The total ensemble weighs on the order of 225 pounds, and we put it on basically in 5 pieces. First, we wear a liquid cooling garment, which is like a set of nylon long underwear with fine little water tubes running everywhere through it, and the air ducts that carry fresh air up to the top of your body and pick up the warm and dirty or carbon dioxide rich air off your fingertips and your feet and pull it back out to get all the carbon dioxide scrubbed out of it. We squirm up into what we call a hut or hard upper torso, and that's like having an old breastplate of armor on, only now it's fiberglass molded to fit the human torso. And that's the hard shell that we've mounted the pumps and tanks to, and that we've mounted the bearings and joints that allow your arms to move to. So you squirt up through that, getting your arms into the sleeves and your head up through the neck ring. And then you've already put on, prior to doing that, probably a pair of pants, basically, which is the lower torso. And that seals around the metal ring just above your waist. The next thing you put on is the little communications cap over which you put the helmet, which seals around your head. What you need for zero-G is a nice dexterous set of gloves that give you fairly good feel on the fingertips and isn't too hard to move, and a lot of mobility of your upper arms and upper body. So the shuttle suit is designed with those things in mind. It has a large backpack that contains several oxygen and water tanks. The water tanks provide you cooling, and the oxygen tanks provide you both the pressure in the suit and the clear gas, the clean gas to breathe. And a set of fans and motors and so forth, obviously, to pump all those things around so you have fresh air and cool water. Working in the suit in 1G here on Earth is very different than it is in 0G. And some of our training involves actually walking in the suit in vacuum chambers with all the air pumped out at vacuum so that you can get a feel for how well the cooling system will take the heat that you're generating as you do exercise. And you actually walk on a treadmill, which is a very ungainly thing to do in that suit. You're in a machine, and that's where you want to be because the machine's giving you all the things you need to live in a vacuum. But you're in a machine that has fans and water and air circulating around, and it's got a big hard part to it that you can bang against if you start rattling around. And so in 1G, it's a fairly cumbersome thing to use.
The best place to practice maneuvering with this suit is underwater, where the effect of gravity is lessened. In this building, there is a full-size mock-up of the shuttle's cargo bay at the bottom of a pool. It's here that Kathryn Sullivan and her partner David Leetsma spent many hours practicing the tasks they'd be doing in orbit.
The water tank training that we do here in Houston for each flight is really about as good as you can get. There are a lot of factors that are not realistic for actual work in space. The fluid dynamics of moving you in a spacesuit through something as viscous as water as compared to moving through the vacuum of space, of course, means that for anything that you're trying to do, the forces you have to exert are a lot higher in the pool than they'll be on orbit.
These million-dollar suits are so heavy when fully assembled, the astronauts can only hang on a rack. But despite the suit's overall weight, smaller weights are balanced strategically on the legs and arms. The weights keep the astronauts from floating to the surface when in position underwater. Once properly balanced, the astronauts are slowly lowered to the bottom where they are assisted by scuba divers. For their mission, Sullivan and Leetsma worked on a prototype of a satellite refueling system placed in the shuttle's cargo bay. The goal of their planned EVA was to demonstrate they could pump highly unstable hydrazine fuel from the shuttle to a simulated satellite, and to prove that satellites not designed for refueling could, with the proper hoses and clamps, be refitted and refueled. They practiced intensively over a 6-month period. While the pool is a fairly good work environment, it is no substitute for actually experiencing the real thing, zero gravity. And the best way to experience zero gravity without actually being in space is to fly parabolic dives in the KC-135, or K-bird. The KC-135 is a military version of the Boeing 707. The airplane climbs steadily to 35,000 feet and then dives steeply for 30 seconds. As it goes over the peak of the curve, the passengers experience the weightlessness associated with zero gravity, but only for 30 seconds at a time. All the astronauts are required to spend some time in the K-bird. In addition to experiencing weightlessness, small tools are tested, and new pieces of equipment are evaluated under these circumstances.
Trying to get the suit on in the K-bird is one of those cases where you're not in zero-G. The K-bird is fooling you. You're not really practicing in zero-G. You're practicing in 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, 30 seconds on. And it can go pretty smoothly sometimes. It's usually a little bit uncomfortable and sometimes close to dangerous because the suit still weighs 225 pounds, and when you pull out at the bottom, it weighs twice that. And it takes several people to help you out and keep an eye on things to make sure that you don't get stuck somewhere coming out of your 30 seconds of zero-G with an arm caught under the suit or partway into the upper torso and about to get one of the ribs pushed down on your body somewhere.
Getting out of the suit, even with assistance, is no easy feat. Kathryn Sullivan's launch was on October 5, 1984, Mission 41G, the first with 2 women crew members. This flight made Sally Ride a 2-time veteran.
Operations and checkout building led by the 2 women on this flight, Kathy Sullivan and Sally Ride.
As we were about to step into the orbiter just before the launch, I think that we were all a little bit apprehensive about what was about to happen, but more than apprehension, I think we all felt excitement.
And Dr. Sally Ride is now entering Orbiter Challenger for her 2nd flight into space. A technician wiping down the soles of her shoes to make sure that no excess dirt.
It's a very exciting situation. You're the only ones on the launch pad. You've just gone all the way up this elevator to the top, nearly. And there are just 3 or 4 people up there, and they're the ones that they're only there because they're going to strap you into the orbiter, and then they're going to leave. And it's a very lonely feeling as soon as the people close the hatch and kind of wave goodbye to you and head down, leave the launch pad.
Mission Specialist 1, Kathy Sullivan, now boarding Challenger's cockpit.
T-minus 15.
I don't think you forget the sense of power and sense of speed building up that you have during those first few minutes of flight. The first 6 minutes or so are very impressive for their power.
0. We have SRB ignition, and the History's largest astronaut crew is on its way.
Over the course of this 8-day mission, the 7-person crew demonstrated the importance of having astronauts on board to solve unforeseen problems.
We had several experiments. It was primarily a scientific mission. The first day we lifted up a large satellite with the remote manipulator arm and let it go and back to the orbiter away from it to leave it go off on its own for a 2 to 5 year mission, looking at the balance between the sun's energy that comes into the Earth and the energy that the Earth radiates back out. And understanding that balance should help us understand in a lot better detail the Earth's climate and in turn how the climate interacts with the ocean. So it's a radiation budget experiment to see how the Earth's systems are driven.
We ran into a problem with the satellite because it has 2 solar panels that need to be swung out before the satellite can be deployed. Otherwise, the satellite can't get any solar power and it's really dead. When we tried to deploy the first solar panel, nothing happened. And we tried several things and nothing happened. We couldn't get it out. And they finally had us take the arm and basically shake the satellite, trying to free the solar panel. And that eventually worked. It took us about an hour of moving the arm and stopping it, moving the arm and stopping it, and trying to just unjam the panel.
Okay, Sally's backing the arm off of the pin at this time, and we'll stand by.
And this is Sally again maneuvering the mechanical arm. On one of the days that we had trouble stowing or refolding the Serbi antenna, she brought the arm down to where it latches itself shut, and as you'll see in just a second here, gently tapped on the latch mechanism so that the little claw would come out over the striker bar and secure the antenna in the payload bay.
This is the Houston Press Center Challenger. We're ready for questions now from Houston.
While orbiting the Earth at 5 miles per second, the crew held its first in-flight press conference.
This is for Commander Crippen and Sally Ride. Could you compare this mission with the other missions that you've been on, comparing the problems and the crowded conditions and the heat, as well as the accomplishments of what you think you're doing up there?
Well, the last mission that I was on with Crip was a great mission, and we really didn't have many problems, and we had a great time the whole time we were up there. This mission, I guess any space flight is a great space flight, and we're having an awful lot of fun. We've had a few more problems, but so far we've been pretty successful in all the things that we've been trying to do. We got the Herb spacecraft deployed on flight day 1, although that was a little bit of a struggle, but just made us all the more happy when we got it out there. And I think that the crowded conditions, it's more crowded with 7 people than it was with 5, but everybody's been pretty good about trying to stay out of everybody else's way, and it's really working pretty well. And as far as the heat goes, we're all from Houston, so it's nothing that we're not used to.
This is Houston Press Center. Do you copy, Challenger?
Hang up and try it again. If you need help, hang up and then dial your operator.
I love it. This is Houston.
We thought we had 7 people aboard, but when we opened up the airlock, it looked for a moment like we had an 8th. We called this guy Ralph for a while. It's actually the backup spacesuit that we carried.
Kathryn Sullivan's specialty is working in the cargo bay. To do her job, she has to walk in space.
The process of getting ready for an EVA starts here in the major portion of the middeck where we put on our long john style cooling garments, and then moves in here where we have the hard torso portion of the spacesuit mounted on the wall. And we put on the lower pant-like lower torso and squirm into the upper torso and seal that all up, do a pressure check to make sure it's holding all the air inside, and then spend 48 minutes washing out of the suit the carbon dioxide and washing out of us and our suit the nitrogen that may be left in our body so that we don't have any problem with the bends. And once we're through with that, this hatch is actually sealed while we're doing that final pre-breathing process. And then when we're finished with that, we do a couple of final leak checks and begin to lower the pressure in the airlock, just dumping the air overboard into the payload bay.
Go ahead.
Okay, O2 is EVA. Time EV is 03. Time left 750. 99% power limiting. 98% O2. 4.3 suit pressure. Oxygen 835. Stop 6210. Sublimator 2.6. Battery volts 16.8. Amps 3.1. RPM 20.0. CO2 0.4. Water temp is 7.2. Gas pressure 15.5. Water pressure 15. That's it. Earth on. Okay. Lesson on. I suppose you'd like some tools to work that in a couple hours.
You know, you would think, sitting here and dreaming about it, you'd think it'd be an amazing moment like reaching the top of a mountain and you just sort of bask in it. And it's actually not like that. There's a lot of work to be done out there. I was a little surprised, in fact, that I was so focused on what we had to get out into the payload bay and do.
Hey, I'm on the cap.
Kathryn Sullivan and David Leetsma had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. Endless hours of practicing satellite refueling procedures was about to pay off.
Oh, time to win. Not with one finger. That's great.
Our exercise here basically was designed to show that we could change our mind about a satellite that we had not intended to fuel on orbit, and with a sophisticated set of tools modify the ground valve so that it could be resurfaced on orbit.
What you got? I got a cap.
The job went smoothly, and we did have some periods of time along the way, usually when Crippen reminded us from the cabin that it was okay to stop and stand back and look at what was going by, because otherwise, if you didn't look outside of your narrow field of view, it was awfully much like doing it in the tank, and you'd have to stop and lean back a little bit to realize that you had never seen that view in the tank before, and you were really doing this on orbit now.
Okay, the cap is off. Get the seal. Nope. No crush cap. Get in it. Doesn't look like it's in there. Nope. Crush cap there. Crush cap's not in there.
Sonic boom has been heard at the Kennedy Space Center. Challenger descending at 200 feet per second. Altitude 34,000 feet. And the Houston Challenger, we're manually opening landing gear, ISO number 1.
We copy.
Challenger now turning left overhead. Range 1.3.
After 133 orbits and 3.4 million miles in space, the crew of 41G landed at the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, Florida.
Touchdown.
I think there's a new wave of interest and excitement about space, and we've come back out of the sort of slow period that followed the Apollo years, and I think we're going into a period that will just continue to expand in everybody's interest as commercial things expand and scientific things. So there is more attention on who is doing what, and how is it getting done, and where do these people come from, and how could I get there? There's a generation of people now who've grown up with space as a reality in their life, and it's not unusual for them to figure that normal people are doing this and maybe I have a chance.
Kathy Sullivan, Mark Garneau, Sally Ryan.
5 years from now, I have no idea where I'll be or what I'll be doing, and there's nothing that I'd rather be doing right now. I'm intending to stay with NASA as long as they'll let me stay.
I really enjoy the work that I'm doing here, and I would hope that I can be around long enough that I can participate in the space station.
There are two things I'd like to be doing in 5 years. One would be getting ready to serve a tour as project scientist for a couple months on the space station, and the second would be either involved or getting ready to be involved in helping plan a return trip to the moon.
The material on this video cassette is protected by copyright. It is for private use only, and any other use, including copying, reproducing, or performance in public, in whole or in part, is prohibited by law.